The year is 1968. The world is in the grip of the Cold War. People are preparing to go to the moon. While all of humanity has set its goal as infinite space, one man, John B. Calhoun, quietly starts an experiment in his laboratory that could affect the fate of humanity. Now close your eyes and imagine a huge metal box made for mice, 2.7 meters by 2.7 meters, 4.5 meters high. What's inside? Everything. Plenty of food, clean water, perfect temperature control, unlimited nest building materials. No disease, no predators. It's like a paradise made for rats. Calhoun places 4 pairs of mice in this utopia, and the experiment begins. But this paradise had one rule. There was no way out, no matter what the outcome of the experiment. And the outcome was probably the collapse of human civilization. Welcome to Find the Truth. Born in 1917 in Tennessee, John Bumpus Calhoun built his education and career in biology, and more specifically in the science of ecological behavior. During the frenzy of production and growth that began at the end of the Second World War, Calhoun was struck by a problem that few had noticed before: the abnormally high rate of population growth and consumerism. While studying this period of human reproduction and consumption frenzy, Calhoun realizes that this process will one day come to an end due to the world's limited resources, and he wonders what will be left of our civilization in this case. Bridging the fields of sociology, psychology, and biology, he decides to embark on an extraordinary experiment to create a utopia for rats. If we ask 10 people on the street now, probably the overwhelming majority of them will tell us that eating, drinking, and having fun is the best way of life, especially the young population. Well, we shouldn't criticize anyone after all. We need to explore our beautiful world. We need to enjoy life. So will this lifestyle really allow you to enjoy life? I want to make the question more specific. Will this lifestyle make you happy? Is your answer to this question yes? Be sure, at the beginning, probably the poor rats thought so, but what happened afterwards was a disaster. There may be some of you who may think, what does a mouse have to do with a human being? But the social structures and hierarchy systems of mice are actually similar to the basic order of humans. Which is why, unfortunately, apart from the experiments you know on mice, many psychological and behavioral scientific experiments are carried out on mice so that these data can be used on humans. Aware of this fact, in 1947, when Calhoun was doing his research at Johns Hopkins University, he wanted to conduct his own experiments outside the university. He asked his neighbor to temporarily set up the unused part of his land for the experiment and created a giant habitat in an area of about 1,000 men and named it Mouse City. Food, water, a safe environment away from predators. What more could a mouse want, right? The only limitation of this paradise was, as I said at the beginning, that it was built in a limited area. The experiment started with 5 pregnant mice, and genetic diversity was ensured to keep them reproducing. Calhoun calculated that this large area could house about 5,000 Norway mice, but interestingly, the population growth stopped at 150. Even more interesting was the fact that the mice did not use this huge area, but rather preferred to live more socially in clusters at various points, often forming groups of 12 mice. The experiment lasted for about 2.5 years, and the results were very interesting. During all this time, the mouse population never exceeded 200, and the main reason for this was the high mortality rate of the baby mice. Now, 2.5 years may seem short to you, but a mouse reaches sexual maturity only 4 to 6 weeks after birth, and the average gestation period is 19 to 21 days, and each birth produces between 6 and 12 offspring. If you consider that a female can give birth almost 10 times a year, you can see how dramatically the population increases in 2.5 years later. The population should increase dramatically in 5 years, but as I said, it never happened because the mothers, for some reason, stopped taking care of their offspring, and most of them died. Calhoun can't figure out why this happened, and 5 years after his experiment, he starts a new job at the National Institute of Mental Health, where he will start new experiments in a secluded place, and Calhoun's utopia of rats will take a much darker turn. Calhoun resumed his experiments in his new and secluded facility, and based on the knowledge he had gained over the years, he began to design utopias that were much more suitable for rats. The first of these was a rectangular utopia divided into 4 main compartments, connected by 3 bridges. All of them, of course, with unlimited food, enough nests, and climate control. As soon as the experiment begins, things start to get very interesting very quickly. Although the females distribute themselves evenly in the 4 compartments, some males take the dominant role and fight for supremacy in places other than their own compartments and use violence against the males who oppose them. As a result of this behavior, the males who are beaten are considered passives in the experiment, and they start to live more and more secluded with the females, away from the alphas. But an interesting behavioral pattern emerges in these males: homosexuality and pansexuality. While some passive males no longer approach females due to alpha pressure and start to approach the alpha sexually, others completely withdraw from reproductive functions and remove themselves from this equation. The main reason for this is, of course, to get rid of the violence and pressure of the alphas. Despite all this oppressive management, it is seen that the mice in the experiment cannot give up clustering again, especially in the food areas. It begins to be seen that the mice come side by side despite all the negative events. The increased population also has an interesting effect on the females, who gradually stop caring for their nests and become more interested in social activities rather than caring for their offspring, which not only increases offspring mortality, but because the maternal instinct in females is gone, even with offspring, alpha males begin to aggressively squeeze females to reproduce. The mating rituals that once took place are replaced by rape, so to speak, and females become even more stressed mothers, leading to increased offspring mortality. It was in this rectangular utopia that Calhoun noted that 3 unusual groups emerged. The first group, called homosexuals or pansexuals, with disordered reproductive and sexual drives. The second group was called somnambulists, which in this experiment means unconscious in Turkish, and consisted of fat mice with low activity levels, who almost never participated in social events and avoided fights and sexual activity. The third unusual group was the hyperactive group called prober, which was a group of mice that were sexually reproductive without discriminating between males and females, as well as constantly exploring, not knowing exactly what they wanted to do, and not giving up these habits despite being frequently beaten by alphas. After this phase, which Calhoun officially called behavioral collapse, the colony was finished because the mothers had almost completely stopped taking care of their children, and the experiment was terminated for this reason. Calhoun's article caused great controversy in American society because the order established for the rats was very much reflective of the modern city life established by humans. And the new trends that emerged as the opportunities in technology developed and the new generation disconnected from the family order led psychologists of the period, such as Carl Rogers, to say in their articles that the behavior of people increasingly resembled the rats in Calhoun's experiments makes me fear for our future. In the 1920s, the marriage rate in the United States was 14 per thousand, and the divorce rate was 1 per thousand. Per thousand, but by the 1960s, these rates had dropped to 8 per thousand in marriages and increased to 2.5 per thousand in divorces. By the way, these rates show us the rate of marriage and divorce in 1 year, which means that in 1960, an average of 8 out of every 1,000 people married, and an average of 2.5 people divorced in that year. In addition, the rate of psychological problems in the population was less than 1% in the 1920s. But by the 1960s, it had risen to 10%. But wait, because the last experiment has not started yet, and when you see its results, you will better understand what kind of collapse we are standing on the brink of today, rather than the rats. The Universe 25. Experiment is actually an experiment that shows us the last stage and the final end of the 24 experiments that preceded it. Calhoun, who started his last experiment with years of knowledge, this time builds a city layout in the full sense of the word. A square mouse city with a side length of 2.7 meters and a height of 4.7 meters. Moreover, the nests for the mice to live in are even designed in the form of today's high-rise apartments. 4 healthy pairs of mice are placed in this utopia with endless food and all kinds of possibilities, and the population begins to increase exponentially every 55 days on average. The first phase lasts about 104 days, and during this period, the mice adapt to the environment and the social structure is formed and everything is fine. The second phase lasts 315 days, the exploitation phase. The mice eat and drink and reproduce at a high rate. But by day 315, the reproduction rate decreases from doubling in 55 days to doubling in 145 days. A serious decline has occurred, and just like in the previous rectangular room experiment, mice showing various unusual behaviors slowly begin to take part in society. From the 560th day onwards, the stagnation phase begins. As in the previous experiments, strange individuals increase. The beaten passive males start to hang out together and even fight among themselves. Passive females start to live together on top of buildings away from the males. Even the alphas begin to show signs of high stress as the population increases, as endless fights break out with each new generation of potential alphas, and the new generation begins to sexually assault the females of the previous alpha generation and even kill the offspring. Calhoun wrote that at the end of this phase, the social order begins to break down completely, and this breakdown is followed by a period of death starting at day 600. During this period, the rats, which are no longer balanced due to the chaos, begin to abandon their barely surviving offspring at a very early age, and therefore the young cannot adapt to society and find a place for themselves in the social structure. Even if the females of this generation become mothers, they are unable to take care of their children because they have lost their maternal instinct, so the mortality rate rises to 96%. The males of the generation, on the other hand, have an interestingly healthy and beautiful appearance with immaculate hair. But the reason is quite surprising. This new generation of males exhibited narcissistic behavior with no sexual drive, passive, spending their time only eating and cleaning themselves, eating, sleeping, and cleaning themselves with no other social interaction. In fact, the last reproductive male in Utopia died on day 1780, in the famous 25. Even more interestingly, even if they put the so-called beautiful mice, who had no purpose, into properly functioning communities, they could never exhibit normal mouse behavior again, so they would die in their own shells and die in their aimless state. Calhoun concludes his research with these alarming words. In scenarios where this kind of social collapse is seen even in rats, it is obvious that the loss of purpose in life by a complex creature such as a human being, the isolation of individuals in society by not being able to assign themselves a role, will trigger violence and social collapse. In the same way, individuals in this state will be so detached from the concept we call reality that they will not even realize that they are alienated from society. By the way, it's a shame for humanity to put these creatures, even if they are mice, into such hellish scenarios for the sake of scientific studies. But unfortunately, we are experiencing the same results of this dark experiment right now, and I'm not saying this to dramatize it. The humanity is about to enter the death phase, which is the 4th phase in the experiment, and maybe it has already entered it, because when we look at the reproduction rates in the world, there is an abnormal decline, especially in developed countries. But since we will go into the details of this issue next week, let's leave it there. For those who say that you are exaggerating, I would like to share some bitter statistical data. You know, I gave you the marriage and divorce rates in the 1960s in America. What do you think the rates are today? 41% of every marriage in America ends in divorce, and this rate has exceeded 30% in Turkey. 77% of the population in our country uses antidepressants. This rate is around 75% in the US. But don't forget that the population is 334 million people. So it is not difficult to understand that there is a very serious psychological trauma in society. We say rats, but look at today's humanity. The alphas are the capitalist barons in our country, or corrupt people or institutions that usurp people's rights through illegal businesses. The modern blue-collar and white-collar class are the ones who are disenfranchised, beaten, and pushed into hunger, even in a world of infinite abundance. Like the rats, many men and women under this oppression react in the same way as the rats did and either become extremely polygamous and have both bisexual and normal relationships with anyone and everyone, or they become completely withdrawn and avoid people and immerse themselves in porn or watching people who open up on social media, which is why the rates of infidelity or polygamy are increasing at an unimaginable level. Women have become masculinized in order to survive in the patriarchal, brutal capitalist order, which has caused them to experience various emotional fractures and to be unable to decide what role to play. Similarly, men started to become femininized and fragile due to intense pressure and manipulation. I am not saying this in the sense that men should go and fight like barbarians and work and not nag. Of course, men are emotional beings too. But the problem here is that it is done with intense indirect psychological pressure that you are not really aware of, and also with chemicals and foods that disrupt your hormonal balance. And this has started to create a situation where men cannot find their role in the inner world after thousands of years of evolution. We don't care if someone next to us falls to the ground and something happens to him. We say, "A snake that doesn't touch me, may the snake live 1,000 lives." We don't care. Just like they gave endless food to the rats, they gave us a phone in our hands, they gave us a TV in our room. We kill time with those empty programs. We think we are making our voices heard on social media, but we don't know that these men set it up just so that we don't take to the streets, and it is run by bots. In short, we think we are experimenting on rats, but in fact we are using rats to understand our own disgraceful order. But unfortunately, we are the real rats in this experiment. People we would be proud of for their scientific achievements are not as well known and valued as those who stick their fingers in the fruit and shake their hips with their bikinis on social media. We criticize them when we talk about it. But how many of us have changed our lives against this? Why do we listen to the life stories of people who have become famous only on YouTube instead of listening to people who have contributed to humanity in most YouTube programs? Why are young people listen to podcasts of porn actors instead of podcasts of motivational speakers and philosophers who really give people useful information? Why do they listen to them? Have you ever thought about why these things are constantly put in front of us? Why did someone put us in the universe, 25 experiment, and expect us to self-destruct? This will be information that you will learn almost completely with the series of videos that will come both next week and the following week. And I hope that it will open your eyes to some bitter truths, and then it will be up to you to make choices about your life. There are many videos on YouTube about the Universe 25 experiment, but I wanted to tell you about it again, especially for the beginning of my series, because they are very little watched videos, and I want to remind people of it again, or tell it to those who don't know about it before, because that experiment is being carried out on us now. Friends, I will leave the report of the experiment and the books on the subject in the description section. Please read and research. I will continue to tell you as much as I can about this system that tries to put people in a prison and crush their souls and hopes. I hope that people will realize some things and understand the value of the great gift called life. They realize that life does not consist of shopping, competing for positions of authority, stepping on each other, and maybe one day we will stop being the subjects of this dirty experiment and realize that we will find happiness within ourselves, not in the way advertisements tell us. As I said, I will prepare content for you on this subject as much as I can, as much as I know. Let's continue to walk this path together. See you next week in the second video of the series. Take care of yourself.